Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Advanced Topics, Ethnography. My apologies for sending you your video one day late. This is the crossroads of our 8-week session courses, and I had assignments due in 2 different courses. So I'm just getting to this course today. I had a chance to read through all your discussion posts. Really interesting stuff. I've responded to most all of them. Um, and I want you to go back and read some of the comments I've made. The way that I've looked at each one of your little mini projects here was to try to tease out of each one some unique topic that is important to understand. So, like for instance, when I looked at Wendy's great uh, um, board here for the interview, it led me to think about how important creating or participating in the space of the phenomena and the participant is. So she explained, as we all know, that she interviewed her cousin on a front porch of her house, and it just got me to think about for an assignment like this, that's completely fine. But in real life, you're often going to find yourself in places that you might not be so comfortable. So it's the space of the participants and their culture and their society. I think I even wrote in my feedback, that could be any place from a foreign culture that you're not familiar with. It could be a prison. It could be working with homeless people or, the very poor. And somehow we need to sort of enter into their world without disturbing it and position ourselves in a place where we can observe it as a participant in that experience. So Wendy's just brought that up to me. That's why I responded that way to Wendy's posting. There was another, I think it was Anna. No, not Anna. Hold on. Um, it's this one. It's Faith's post. And here I wanted to focus on something else. Um, uh, Faith did a great job in a very short period of time, right in this case presentation section, to introduce us to Amina and her grandmother, Halima. And in a very short period of time, we get a really rich description of what's going on here. And for some of you, I think that's the next step in the way that you're collecting data, is figuring out how you're going to tell this story like a storyteller would, but use the data that you've collected as fact. Now, in this case, what I really liked about what Faith did was she talked about Amina being a young, compassionate woman. She uh, uh, made us aware of Halima's illnesses, her battles. She even commented on the condition of her skin and that she had something going on with her bones. It could have been bone cancer, but we don't know that. But what we do know is she's in pain and she's old and she needs some sort of care that is not available um, in the village that she lives, and also discusses how the attitudes and belief systems of the community sort of hamper it even more. Now, I just described it to you in a very dry way, but Faith is describing it in a very rich way that almost transports us to the situation, even though we as readers don't have that firsthand experience. We can imagine what Amina might look like. We can imagine what Halima might look like. We can imagine the attitudes of the elders and the care, their traditional care that they might choose instead of even getting their head around the concept of palliative care. In very short, I think this might be 3 sentences, we get a lot of rich information. I think for some of you, when you return back to this exercise, just for your own purposes, you might want to see how you can turn the sort of dry descriptions into something that is much more rich, that brings the reader into the situation. The other one that brought up other thoughts are the idea of establishing themes. I want to say this is Natera. Yeah. Okay. So here, Natera, and I wrote comments about this too, is really starting to what I say what I sometimes call creating piles. You can imagine a different metaphor if it works for you. But she's starting to think, okay, there's stuff about diagnosis of autism that is part of the story. There's stuff about autism knowledge that's part of the story. There's stuff about perception of ASD diagnoses, et cetera, et cetera. So this is another great technique where while you are engaging with the person or people that you are working with, ethnographically, we are trying to, and you could almost think of it like imagine the chapters of a book, where each one of these in Natera's example sort of give us a list of items that could go into like one chapter of a book. Think of it that way. And we build on it, and we collect more data, and we may even find that there's more bullets than you probably would find if you interviewed more people. There's probably more bullets underneath of, say, for instance, knowledge about autism, okay? And imagine that being a chapter of that story. I think this is a good example of how ethnographers need to think about um, uh, how data is actually part of the description of how you're going to relay the story using ethnography. And then I wanted to go to Kim's for a minute. Um, and Kim, you did a great job. What I wanted to draw on here is the difference between grounded theory, which is another naturalistic methodology you may or may not be familiar with, and ethnography. There is a difference. Grounded theory is when we go out into the field, really knowing very little. So we have to be like super receptive to what is going on, and starting to pull threads together that we didn't even know come together, in the hopes that ultimately we're going to be able to build theory about a problem. We might not even know what the problem is when we go out into the field using grounded theory. We will learn what the problem is. In ethnography, it's not quite as blind, if you want to use that term. You're going out into the field knowing a little bit about what's going on. In fact, you might even know a lot about what's going on. The difference is what we're trying to get to is deep meaning from the participants that we are engaging with in the study. So, we may know that palliative care services are not available everywhere, and globally, some places don't even, think about what that might look like. We know that. But we don't know what the firsthand experience is of that. And that's what we're really getting to. What's the deep meaning? What does it mean when the grandmother in Anna's story is torn between, you know, the information she may be receiving from her granddaughter and her allegiance to cultural mores and cultural beliefs and values, including cultural traditional medicines and so forth. That's the part of the story we don't know so well. We want to get deeper and understand what the meaning of all of that is. So in Kim's, I think what I noticed right away, it was sort of, we were building a lot of background information. She interviewed Kim, a lot of background information with the presumption, I believe, that first generation nursing students might have more trouble navigating the system than other types of students. Okay. This is an example where I might even start with allowing the participant to sort of tell that story. And instead of starting with, where were you born, where, what, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, sort of like the demographic material, because we kind of know that already. We know that Kim is a first generation nursing student. We know that part. But rather get into, tell me the experience you've had as a first generation nursing student, and just let that flow. And from that, you will start to be able to make those piles that I talked about, where we start to say, oh, there's issues of, I'm going to make this up. There's issues of racial discrimination. There are issues of disorientation from family values. There's issues of whatever, whatever, whatever. Those piles start to emerge. Sometimes we want to start off just allowing the participant to sort of tell their story. And from that, we get to start to create the piles or the stacks or whatever you want to call them, that are the more specific areas which you'll require to go back and look at, either as a participant observer or doing more interviewing, or maybe even, things that you might not ever think you do, like looking at documents. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing document analysis in ethnography. What it adds to the richness is, for literate cultures where we write things down and store them away, it helps us understand, oh, what's the mission of this group? Are there values written down somewhere? For more oral traditions where they don't do that so much, you don't have many documents to look at, and you have to sort of tease that out of the people that you are interfacing with. So I wanted to just give you, I know this is a reading week. You're going to continue reading, stacked over here behind me, the three big ethnographies that we have for the course. And let me just go quickly to session 9. And give me a second here. I can share. So it's possible some of you have completed your reading. And if you want to look ahead, we'll be moving in session 9, which is next week, into narrative analysis. So it's a lot of what I've just been discussing about how do you take what the data you've collected and turn it into a story. Now, the activity for session 9 is sort of a deconstruct. We're going to look at the big ethnographies, the books that you have all chosen, and identify places in your reading where you can argue that the presentation of the study may have depended on each of these types of notes. This is going back to the types of notes that individual ethnographers will take, the way they capture information. We watched a video that was clearly about a young ethnographer in Southeast Asia, and he explained, I take notes in all kinds of ways. In fact, he does it purposefully so that everything's not just in a little notebook. It might be a combination of things. And this is where things get messy. But I'd like to deconstruct. So as you're reading, or if you're done, you can start to identify where in the big ethnography you can see how different types of notes might have been, or excuse me, not just notes, different types of data collection, data management tools would have helped the ethnographer tell the story the way it was intended to be told. So it might be about certain policies or something in Lisa. It might be about certain protocols that are followed and when a soldier returns from the front line and goes to Walter Reed, or et cetera, et cetera. Imagine if you can, and maybe even if those notes are in the back of the ethnography, look into how the ethnographer managed the data to come to the point where they're actually telling the story. And then respond to one another about how their ethnography shows similar evidence of notes that may have been developed into meaningful stories. Okay, so if you're done your book, you can move forward if you like. But this will be for session 9 that starts next Monday. Again, always great to read your responses to these activities. It's a really great opportunity to exercise what we would be doing if we were all sitting in the same classroom. We would be bouncing off each other's ideas. And that's why it's important to really go back to the discussion boards, especially when we're presenting different things, and see what you can extrapolate from them, from each person's work. And of course, my responses. So I hope you all have a great week. Enjoy the rest of your ethnography if you're not finished. And I'll be looking for you again next Monday when we move forward. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.